The sound a heavy-duty padlock makes when it snaps shut is surprisingly final. It's a solid metallic thunk that echoes across the water of the otherwise serene community pool, a sound that says, "This conversation is over. I have won." Brenda stood there, her chest puffed out with the kind of smug satisfaction you only see on toddlers who've successfully shoved a square peg into a round hole. She gave the thick, greasy chain one last rattle for emphasis. It was wrapped around the gleaming new seat of my pool lift, pinning it to the main column like a butterfly in a Psycho's collection. Her handiwork complete, she turned her venomous little glare on me. "This is a liability," she spat, her voice a low hiss that barely carried over the gentle lapping of the pool's filter system. "It hasn't been approved. It's closed." I just stared. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. My internal monologue, however, was conducting a beautiful symphony of profanity, a veritable Handel's Messiah of curse words. I looked at the chained lift, my brand-new state-of-the-art ticket to a life with less pain. I looked at Brenda's triumphant, pinched face, a face that probably soured milk from 10 paces. Then I looked at my watch. It was 9:57 a.m. How did I get here, you ask? Poised on the brink of a suburban war, my greatest enemy a 50-something woman in khaki shorts with a weaponized clipboard? It all started 3 months ago with the promise of paradise and the reality of a flat-pack bookshelf from hell. My nemesis wasn't a drunk driver or a catastrophic skiing accident. It was a Swedish-engineered bookcase named Billy and a rogue domestic robot. In a scene of slapstick violence that would have made the Three Stooges proud, I had tripped over our Roomba while carrying the fully assembled Billy, resulting in a complex spinal injury and a new, intimate relationship with a wheelchair. The doctors said I'd recover, maybe even fully, but it would take time and intensive physical therapy. The best thing for me, they all agreed, was aquatic therapy. So my wife and I found Cypress Creek Estates. On paper, it was perfect. A nice single-story house, wide doorways, and the crown jewel, a massive, sparkling community pool just a short roll away. It was an idyllic picture of manicured lawns, identical mailboxes painted in a shade of beige called desert serenity, and a quiet so profound you could hear a neighbor's sprinklers switch on from 3 houses down. We signed the papers, dreaming of sun-drenched afternoons and my triumphant return to the world of the bipedal. What the glossy brochure failed to mention was the Homeowners Association. The HOA here wasn't just an organization. It was a presence, a shadowy cabal that governed the neighborhood with an iron fist and a 300-page book of bylaws. In my first few weeks, I treated it like a nature documentary. I was David Attenborough, observing the strange rituals of the Homo suburbanus. I saw passive-aggressive notes left on the windshield of a car parked 2 inches over the line. I heard the hushed, fearful whispers about Gary from number 42, who had the audacity to install a garden gnome that was, apparently, whimsical to the point of being aggressive. I witnessed the palpable panic of the Henderson family when they realized they'd left their trash can at the curb for a full 6 hours and 7 minutes post-pickup, a cardinal sin. I, of course, planned to stay out of it. My goals were simple: work my remote software engineering job, go to the pool for my PT, and regain the ability to put on my own pants without looking like a flipped-over turtle. I had no time for petty drama. The universe, it seemed, had other plans, and its instrument of chaos was Brenda. The knock came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a friendly tap-tap-tap. It was a percussive, authoritative thump-thump-thump that suggested the door had personally offended the knocker. I rolled over, opened it, and was greeted by a woman who looked like she was constructed entirely of right angles. She had a severe, helmet-like haircut that looked like it was done with a ruler and a grudge, a lemon-yellow polo shirt tucked so tightly into her khaki shorts I worried about her circulation, and a clipboard held across her chest like a ballistic shield. She didn't introduce herself by name. That would be far too personal. "I'm the chair of the Architectural and Aesthetics Committee," she announced, her eyes immediately flicking down to my doorway. "Leo," I said, offering a hand she completely ignored. Her focus was laser-sharp, fixed on my welcome mat. It was a gift from my sister, a simple black mat with white text that read, "Hope you brought wine." "This," she said, pointing a stern finger at the mat, "is a violation." I blinked. "The mat?" "Bylaw 7, Section 4C, she recited from memory, her voice devoid of all emotion. "All exterior entrance mats must be of a solid, neutral color, beige, gray, or charcoal, and be no larger than 24 by 36 inches. She took a small measuring tape from a clip on her belt and crouched down with a grunt. "Yours is 25 by 37, and it has lettering." She said the word lettering with the same disgust someone else might use for active skin rash. My brain went into overdrive, sifting through 1,000 sarcastic responses. "I'm sorry, is my mat's unbridled enthusiasm for Chardonnay disrupting the neighborhood's delicate emotional ecosystem? Should I have gotten one that says, 'Abandon all hope, ye who enter here,' instead? Would that be more aesthetically harmonious?" What I actually said was, "My apologies. I didn't realize my threshold for hospitality was in violation of community standards. I'll have it rectified before it causes a market crash." The sarcasm was a supersonic jet, and it flew right over her head. She didn't crack a smile. She didn't even acknowledge the attempt at humor. She simply made a sharp, decisive tick on her clipboard. "You have 24 hours to come into compliance," she stated flatly. "After that, a formal citation will be issued. Good day." She turned on her sensible Skechers and marched away, leaving me in the doorway, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it all. The battle lines, it seemed, had been drawn, and they were drawn at my front door. After Mattgate, I knew I had to be careful. Brenda was clearly a woman who derived her life force from enforcing petty rules, and I was about to propose something far more significant than a welcome mat. I was going to modify her sacred community pool. I decided to build a case so airtight that not even a creature as furiously pedantic as Brenda could find fault with it. My first step was research. I spent a week diving into the world of ADA-compliant pool lifts, learning about weight capacities, battery life, and stainless steel finishes. I settled on a top-of-the-line model, one used in hospitals and therapy centers across the country. My next step was to preempt the HOA. I drafted a polite, professional email to the General Board, a document so dripping with reasonableness it was practically sticky. "To the Cypress Creek Estates HOA Board, I am writing to inform you of a necessary medical accommodation I will be installing at the community pool area. As a result of a recent injury, I require aquatic therapy for my rehabilitation. To facilitate this, I will be installing an Aqua Motion 5000 pool lift." I attached everything: the lift's schematics, its ADA-compliant certificates, a letter from my physical therapist explaining the medical necessity, and even a mock-up of how it would look on the pool deck. I wasn't asking for permission. The Fair Housing Act was very clear that they couldn't deny a reasonable and necessary accommodation. I was simply informing them, giving them the courtesy of a heads-up. I made sure to CC the general HOA info box, which I knew went directly to Brenda's inbox. Let the games begin. Then I hired Gus. Gus was a contractor who specialized in accessibility installations. A man in his 60s with a grizzled beard, hands like catcher's mitts, and an aura of profound, world-weary competence. When he showed up at my house to do the site survey, the first words out of his mouth were, "Great, an HOA. Let me guess, the color of your house is called Grage Majesty or Taupe Whisper." "Desert Serenity," I corrected. He snorted. "Close enough. They all sound like sad paint colors for a sad cult." I knew immediately we'd get along. He looked over my paperwork, inspected the pool deck, and confirmed everything was in order. The city permits were straightforward, and the installation would only take a day. "Listen, Leo," he said, packing up his tools, "I've done this 100 times. The law is on your side 100%. The Fair Housing Act is a sledgehammer when it comes to stuff like this, but that won't stop these committees from being a giant pain in the neck until you swing it. They'll find any excuse to delay, to question, to make your life difficult. Just be ready for a fight." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. I had done my homework. I had the law on my side. I had Gus. What could possibly go wrong? Installation day dawned bright and clear. Gus and his two-man crew arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, their truck loaded with the gleaming pieces of my future freedom. They were pros, quiet, efficient, and respectful of the pristine pool deck. The sounds of their work, the clean whir of a power drill and the clink of stainless steel, were music to my ears. For a few hours, everything was perfect. I sat in my patio chair, sipping coffee and imagining the cool relief of the water. And then, at precisely 10:17 a.m., she appeared. It was like something out of a horror movie. One minute, the perfectly trimmed hedge at the edge of the pool area was just a hedge. The next, Brenda was materializing from it, clipboard in hand, her face a mask of thunderous rage. She didn't walk, she marched, her sensible sketchers eating up the concrete with grim purpose. "Cease all activity immediately," she boomed, her voice cutting through the morning air. Gus, who was in the middle of tightening a bolt, slowly stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "This is an unapproved permanent structural modification to a community amenity," she declared, puffing out her chest. "Ma'am, it's a federally protected medical accommodation," Gus replied, his voice a low, calm rumble. He was clearly used to this. "We have all the city permits right here." He gestured to the folder sitting on a nearby lounge chair. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. "City permits don't supersede Cypress Creek bylaws. This device is an eyesore and a liability. It ruins the aesthetic flow of the leisure area." I decided it was time to intervene and rolled myself over. "Brenda, ruining the aesthetic flow is kind of my thing. You should see my new welcome mat. It's a thrilling shade of charcoal gray. Besides, my inability to walk is a bit of a liability right now, and this is the fix. We sent the board all the paperwork weeks ago. You were CC'd. She completely ignored me, her eyes locked on Gus. It was a classic power play. Ignore the person you're actually in conflict with and target the person they hired. She reached into a large canvas bag and pulled out her secret weapon, a pre-printed, luridly red and freshly laminated sign that read, HOA Stop Work Order. With a flourish, she produced a heavy-duty zip tie and fastened the sign to the partially installed lift. "This work is not authorized to continue," she announced. Gus sighed, the sound of a man who had seen this exact scene play out a dozen times. "Leo," he said, turning to me, "my guys can't work with this sign on here. Legally it's bull, but practically we touched that thing, and she'll claim we assaulted an official HOA document or something. We're gonna have to pack it up for the day. Call me when you sort out the dragon lady." His team, with practiced efficiency, began cleaning up their tools. I sat there, fuming, watching my hope for a quick resolution get packed away in a toolbox. Brenda stood by the pool, arms crossed, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She had won the battle, and she knew it. "You can't just do this, Brenda," I said, my voice tight with anger. "This is illegal. It's interference with a disability accommodation. My only concern is the safety and integrity of our community," she said, her voice dripping with false piety. "Then remove the sign," I demanded. "Absolutely not." I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. "Fine." I pulled out my phone. My first thought was to call Gus back, to call a lawyer, to call anyone who could help. But rage is a powerful motivator, and it makes you do stupid things. Brenda, seeing my phone, took it one step further. Her eyes widened with theatrical panic. "He's threatening me," she gasped to the empty air. Then she pulled out her own phone and dialed 3 numbers. "Yes, 911? I'd like to report unauthorized construction and trespassers on community property at the Cypress Creek Pool. The man responsible is becoming very aggressive. Please send help." I stared at her, my jaw on the floor. She had just called the cops, on me, for trying to install a piece of medical equipment that I had every legal right to have. This had officially gone from absurd to insane. 15 minutes later, a squad car rolled silently to the curb. Out stepped 2 officers. The first was a man in his late 40s with tired eyes, a permanent slump to his shoulders, and a mustache that looked like it had given up all hope. This was Officer Miller. His partner, Officer Davis, was young, bright-eyed, and still had the crisp creases in his uniform that suggested he thought police work was going to be all car chases and excitement, not settling disputes between grown adults acting like children. Their collective body language screamed, "Great!" Another HOA call. Brenda launched into her performance. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she cried, rushing toward them. "These men were attempting to install this contraption without proper authorization, and when I tried to stop them, this man became belligerent." Officer Miller's gaze drifted from Brenda's frantic face to Gus, who was leaning against his truck looking bored. "You got permits?" Miller asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. Gus silently handed him the folder. Miller flipped through it, his expression unchanging. "Looks fine," he grunted, handing it back. He then turned his tired eyes to me. "This your project?" I explained the whole story. The injury, the physical therapy, the ADA, the Fair Housing Act, the emails to the board, everything. All while Brenda stood by, interjecting with things like, "But the bylaws," and "It's an eyesore." Finally, Miller turned to her, his patience worn down to a single frayed thread. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. It's between him," he nodded at me, "and the HOA. There's no crime being committed here. These men are not trespassing. They were invited contractors." "But the bylaws!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. Officer Miller delivered the line with the deadpan precision of a seasoned comedian. "Ma'am, I don't carry a copy of the Cypress Creek Estates bylaws in my squad car. We don't arrest people for welcome mats or unapproved taupe." Officer Davis stifled a laugh with a cough. The impasse was clear. Miller explained that they couldn't force Brenda to remove her sign, and they couldn't force Gus to work while the dispute was ongoing. It was a civil issue, and our only recourse was to sort it out with the HOA or take them to court. They tipped their hats and left, leaving me in a cloud of exhaust fumes and impotent rage. Brenda stood by her sign-adorned lift, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. Round 2 to the Dragon Lady. The next few days were a blur of digital warfare. I declared a one-man email assault on the HOA board, a campaign of shock and awe waged via Gmail. I sent them everything. Links to the Fair Housing Act's section on accommodations, in-depth articles on the Americans with Disabilities Act. I even copied the National Fair Housing Alliance on our email chain, a move I hoped would feel like I was calling in an airstrike. The board itself remained silent, but Brenda, having appointed herself their digital Cerberus, replied to every single message. Her emails were masterpieces of passive-aggressive corporate jargon and twisted logic, clearly designed to frustrate me into submission. My first email, citing the FHA, subject, FW'd, official notice of medical accommodation installation, to HOA Board, CC, brenda.aesthetics@cypresscreek.org, info@nationalfairhousing.org. Dear Board, as per my previous emails and the attached documentation, the installation of this ADA-compliant pool lift is a non-negotiable medical accommodation protected under federal law. Your interference is illegal. Please remove the stop work order immediately. Brenda's reply less than 10 minutes later. Subject, RE, official notice of medical accommodation installation. From Brenda, Chair, Architectural and Aesthetics Committee. Dear Mr. Leo, the FHA requires reasonable accommodations. We do not feel this permanent installation is reasonable when a temporary, less visible solution could be explored. The Board has a duty to all residents. My response, with a link to the definition of reasonable, subject, official notice of medical accommodation installation. Brenda, the lift is the industry standard. There is no temporary equivalent. This is the definition of reasonable. Remove the sign. Her counter-argument, subject, liability, concerns regarding unapproved pool structure. Mr. Leo, furthermore, the Board must consider the potential for injury to children who may see the lift as a play structure. Our insurance liability is the primary concern. We cannot approve an installation until a full risk assessment has been completed by an approved vendor. My final, exasperated volley. Subject, you cannot be serious. Brenda, you're inventing roadblocks. This is a medical device, not a jungle gym. It is insured, permitted, and safer than the diving board you have at the deep end. This is textbook discrimination. Her pièce de résistance. Subject. Final notice. Aesthetic harmony and community standards. Mr. Leo, per Section 9 of the Cypress Creek Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, all modifications must be in harmony with the community's overall aesthetic. A piece of medical equipment is, by definition, clinical and not in harmony with our leisure-focused poolside ambiance. This is the Board's final position. Any attempt to restart construction will be considered a willful violation of a Board directive. I was losing my mind. She was arguing that my disability aid wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough for her little beige kingdom. I was venting, practically shouting into the phone at Gus, who listened patiently. She's going to risk assess me into next year, Gus. She's talking about the ambiance. I told you, kid, Gus said, his voice a calming rumble. They do this. They throw spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks. They try to drown you in paperwork and nonsense until you give up. So what do? Get a lawyer? That'll take months. You could, Gus said thoughtfully. Or we go over her head. And I don't mean the Board, they're useless. I mean the state. The state? Yeah. The state inspector for public pools and lodging has to sign off on this thing anyway, once it's installed. He's the final word. No HOA bylaw in the world can override a state health and safety inspector. He's the guy who can shut this whole pool down if the chlorine is off by half a percentage point. He's God in this little ecosystem. A glorious, beautiful idea began to form in my mind. So I could call him? I asked, my voice full of hope. You absolutely could, Gus said. Give his office at the Department of Health a call. Don't file a formal complaint yet. Just schedule a preliminary consultation. Tell him what's going on, that you're trying to install a required lift and the HOA is playing games. These guys hate when amateurs play with compliance and safety regulations. It offends them on a spiritual level. I hung up with Gus, my heart pounding with a newfound sense of purpose. I found the number for the county's public health department and navigated the automated phone tree until I got a real live human. I asked for the pool inspector and was transferred to a man named Frank. Frank's voice was exactly what you'd expect. It was a flat, gravelly monotone that sounded like it had been fueled by 30 years of lukewarm coffee and disappointment in his fellow man. I explained the entire situation, from the welcome mat to the laminated stop work order. I expected surprise, or maybe even a little sympathy. I got neither. So a homeowners association is blocking an ADA-compliant lift install on a public community pool after you filed permits? Frank said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. He then paused for a beat. Shocking. Never happens. The sarcasm was so dry, it could have started a forest fire. I knew I had my man. Look, I said, I don't want to cause a huge problem. I just want my lift installed. Can I schedule you to come out and inspect it, maybe give an official opinion? I can do that, Frank said. How's Friday morning? Say 10 a.m. Friday at 10 a.m. is perfect, I said, a grin spreading across my face. I now had an ace up my sleeve. A very bored, very powerful, state-sanctioned ace. I called Gus. Phase 2 is a go, I told him. Can you and your guys come by Thursday afternoon, finish the job quietly? Consider it done, kid, he said. The dragon won't know what hit her. Friday morning, 9:55 a.m. The sun was brilliant, the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, and the pool water sparkled with an inviting shimmer. The lift, installed yesterday by Gus's stealthy crew, sat gleaming on the deck, a monument to modern engineering and my own stubbornness. I was in my swim trunks, a towel over my lap, sitting in my wheelchair at the edge of the pool. This was it. The culmination of weeks of fighting, of emails, of pure, unadulterated frustration. In 5 minutes, I was going to be in that water. It was a perfect moment. And perfect moments, especially in Cypress Creek Estates, are made to be shattered. I saw the motion out of the corner of my eye. Brenda, storming out of the back door of her house, which of course had a panoramic view of the community pool she lorded over. She wasn't carrying her clipboard this time. She was carrying something far more sinister. A thick, greasy-looking metal chain and a padlock the size of a fist. She had seen me heading for the pool, and this was her last, desperate nuclear option. She marched onto the deck, her face a thundercloud of righteous fury. Without saying a single word, she began to wrap the chain around the lift. She looped it through the seat, around the main column, pulling it viciously tight. The links clanked and scraped against the pristine stainless steel, a sound that made me physically cringe. She cinched it, threaded the end of the chain through the padlock, and with a final, decisive thunk, she snapped it shut. As a finishing touch, she pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, laminated, of course, and taped it to the control box. "Pool amenity offline by order of the HOA," it screamed in an aggressive all-caps font. "Do not tamper. Violators will be prosecuted." She finally turned to me, her chest heaving, a look of pure, spiteful victory on her face. "This is a liability," she hissed. "It hasn't been approved. It's closed." I just stared. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. My brain, which had been simmering with rage for weeks, suddenly became a place of zen-like calm. It was the calm of a man who knows he's holding a royal flush, while his opponent is bluffing with a pair of twos. Everything had fallen perfectly into place. I looked at the monstrously chained lift. I looked at Brenda's smug, hateful face. Then, I looked at my watch. It was 9:57 a.m. Brenda smirked, probably thinking I was about to call the cops again and lose another round. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to my recent calls, and hit the top number. The phone barely rang once before he picked up. "Frank," the monotone voice answered. "Hey, Frank, it's Leo," I said, my voice calm and friendly. "Yeah, the guy from Cypress Creek Estates. You close by?" I listened for a moment, a small smile playing on my lips. "Perfect. Hey, little change of plans for that consultation. Instead of my place, could you meet me at the main community pool? Should be easy to find." I paused, letting the moment hang in the air, savoring it. "It's the one with the brand new ADA-compliant lift that's been illegally chained shut by a woman in khaki shorts." I paused again as Frank said something on the other end. "Yeah. No, I'm not kidding. Okay, see you in a minute." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I then turned to Brenda and gave her the calmest, most serene smile she had ever seen. A smile of pure, unadulterated, impending victory. "An inspector from the State Department of Health will be here in about 3 minutes to discuss your chain and padlock approach to ADA compliance," I said cheerfully. "You might want to stick around." I wish I had a camera to capture the look on her face. The smug triumph drained away, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally pure, ice-cold, pants-wetting terror. Her reign was over. She just didn't know how badly yet. Exactly 2 minutes and 45 seconds later, a nondescript Ford sedan rolled to a stop by the pool entrance. Out stepped a man who was the physical embodiment of his voice. Frank was in his late 50s, with slacks that had a permanent crease, a pale blue polo shirt with a barely visible State Department logo embroidered on the chest, and an aura of supreme, unassailable boredom. He carried a heavy-duty metal clipboard. He was Brenda's ultimate form, her final evolution, and he was here to collect her soul. He walked onto the pool deck with the unhurried gait of a man who knows he is the most powerful person in any room he enters. He gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Then his eyes fell on the chained-up lift. He stopped. He stared at it for a solid 5 seconds, his expression unchanging. Then he looked at Brenda, who had gone rigid, looking like a terrified statue in a museum of petty tyrants. Frank didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He simply pulled out his phone and began taking pictures from multiple angles: the chain, the padlock, the laminated sign, Brenda's horrified face. It was all evidence. After documenting the scene, he turned to Brenda, his voice a flat, clinical monotone. "Are you the individual who placed this chain on this piece of medical equipment?" he asked. It wasn't approved," Brenda stammered, her confidence completely shattered. "It's a liability. I represent the HOA." Frank made a note on his clipboard. "Okay, so the HOA is officially taking the position that violating the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and multiple state-level accessibility codes is preferable to a perceived, undocumented liability." He looked up at her. "Can I get your name and title for my report?" Brenda paled, muttering her name. Frank proceeded to calmly, methodically, and soul-crushingly dismantle her. It wasn't an argument. It was an autopsy. "Do you have a copy of the HOA's insurance policy that explicitly excludes this type of certified equipment?" he asked. "Well, no, but did the HOA conduct a formal, documented risk assessment on this specific lift, performed by a licensed and bonded professional? We were going to... Can you show me the minutes from the board meeting where you voted to deny this accommodation and the legal justification for doing so? It was an informal decision. Are you personally certified by any state or federal agency to make assessments on public safety equipment?" "I'm the chair of the aesthetics committee," she squeaked. With every stammered excuse, Frank just made another quiet note on his clipboard. The scratching of his pen was the soundtrack to the death of her authority. Then, he looked around the pristine pool area. "Well, while I'm here," he said, his voice laced with the slightest hint of malicious compliance, "let's just do a full annual inspection." He started walking the perimeter of the pool, and his eyes, trained by decades of looking for flaws, found them everywhere. "The depth markers here are faded," he said, tapping a spot with his shoe. "That's a citation. The anti-vortex drain cover appears to be a non-compliant model, That's a big citation. Let's check the pump room." He disappeared for 2 minutes and returned, shaking his head. "The chemical log hasn't been updated in a week. Another citation, and the emergency telephone isn't working." He picked up the red emergency phone, put it to his ear, and listened. No dial tone. That's a very, very big citation. Potentially big enough to shut the pool down until it's rectified. He walked back over to Brenda, who looked like she was about to faint. "You were so worried about the brand new, perfectly safe, and federally mandated piece of equipment," he said, his voice dropping half an octave, "that you missed all the things that could actually get someone hurt. The state takes a dim view of that." He walked to his car and returned with a pair of bolt cutters. With a single, satisfying snap, the padlock fell to the ground. He unwound the chain and tossed it on a lounge chair. He then ripped Brenda's laminated sign off the lift, tore it in half, and dropped it in the trash. He scribbled for a final minute on his clipboard, tore off the top sheets, and handed a thick stack of carbon copy citations to the trembling Brenda. I couldn't see the total, but from the number of zeros I could make out, it was probably more than her car was worth. He turned to me. "It's officially inspected, compliant, and operational," he said. "Enjoy your swim." And with that, the auditing angel of vengeance got in his sedan and drove away. Brenda scurried away without another word, clutching the tickets like they were a death sentence. 10 minutes later, as I was floating in the cool, welcoming water for the first time, feeling the weightlessness take the pressure off my spine, my phone, which I'd left on a poolside table, began to ring. I paddled over and answered it. "Leo! Leo, thank God!" The voice was high-pitched with panic. It was Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, a man whose spine, I was now certain, was made of jelly. "Hello, Mr. Henderson," I said calmly. "Leo, I am so sorry. We just got a call from the state health department and our insurance company. Brenda was overzealous, a rogue agent. She has been suspended from all committee duties pending a full board review. This is a complete nightmare. Please, tell me what we can do to make this right. Is there anything at all we can do for you?" I floated on my back, looking up at the perfect blue sky. A smile spread across my face. "Funny you should ask, Mr. Henderson," I said, the sweet taste of victory on my lips. "I do have a few small requests." I laid out my terms, my voice dripping with the newfound power of a man who had brought the full weight of the state down upon his enemies. Henderson agreed to everything without a moment's hesitation. He would have agreed to sacrifice his firstborn son at that point. I swam for another hour, the water feeling more liberating than I had ever imagined. A month later, Cypress Creek Estates felt like a different place. The oppressive quiet had been replaced by the normal sounds of a neighborhood. Kids laughing, music playing from a backyard barbecue. The gentle hum of life. The fear was gone. My lift stood proudly by the pool, used daily, a silent testament to the war that had been won. My physical therapy was progressing faster than my doctor could believe. Being in the water every day was a miracle. The neighborhood grapevine, which was more efficient than any news organization, had delivered the final chapter on Brenda. Faced with a recall petition signed by more than half the community, people who had secretly despised her reign of terror but were too afraid to speak up, and potentially being held personally liable for the mountain of fines she had incurred, Brenda and her husband put their house on the market. A "sold" sign went up 2 weeks later. She was gone, vanished from the community she had tried so desperately to control, leaving behind nothing but the memory of her tyranny and a few illegally whimsical garden gnomes that had started popping up on lawns in quiet rebellion. One afternoon, I was relaxing in a lounge chair after my swim. A guy I recognized from a few houses down, Gary from number 42, walked over. He was holding a beer and had a brand new, offensively cheerful-looking gnome tucked under his other arm. "Hey, man," he said, a huge grin on his face. "I just wanted to thank you. You freed us all. My wife bought me this guy to celebrate." He held up the gnome, who was riding a unicorn. "I think I'll put him right on the front lawn." "Just make sure he's aesthetically harmonious," I said with a laugh. He clapped me on the shoulder and went on his way. I took a sip of my iced tea and looked out at the sparkling pool. It was funny how things worked out. I had moved here seeking peace and quiet, and instead I'd found myself in a ridiculous, pitched battle over rules and regulations. But in the end, I'd learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the only way to deal with a petty tyrant who wields a little clipboard is to find a bigger, more powerful bureaucrat with a much, much bigger clipboard. The victory was total, and it was sweet. And waiting for me at my front door, sitting proudly in the afternoon sun, was my new welcome mat. Charcoal gray, 24 by 36 inches. Perfectly, deliciously compliant.